Good evening, and welcome to the Village of Webster Board meeting for June 10th, 2021. If you would please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Al, would you lead us, please? Sure.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. This evening, we have a special presentation. Back in November, the board charged for two things to happen. One, a study by a committee in terms of the possibility of consolidating the two sewer districts, two sewer plants of the Village of Webster and the Town of Webster. And in conjunction with that, there was also a mandate or a resolution to pursue and to look at the development of our own plant in terms of what would be needed in terms of the permits, maybe a new filter, etc. And so these two avenues have taken place. And this evening, as the committee was charged, there is a presentation to be made by, I guess, the chairperson of that committee, by Matt Chatfield, the executive director of the Webster Economic Development Alliance. So at this time, I would first of all like to also welcome the town board. Good evening, and welcome again to our meeting room and listening to the presentation, which was formed, called jointly between two municipalities. So, Matt, if you would take the platform, stage, microphone, and we're looking forward to the presentation of the considerations for consolidation by the group.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Barnes. Good evening. Again, my name is Matt Chatfield. I am the Executive Director of the Webster Economic Development Alliance. It is a non-profit public-private partnership, and it is composed of the Town of Webster, the Village of Webster, the School District, the Chamber of Commerce, and then here in the Village of Webster, we're lucky enough to have a business improvement district. So those five entities got together and created this entity, and we work on behalf of the entirety of Webster Town and Village. So the mayor described in brief what the charge of the committee, of what is really not even a committee, it was a working group, has been. And just for a quick background, very brief background for those of you who have not been following this as closely as many others. The town and village operate two largely independent sewer systems, and they do cross paths at the final point just before the effluent gets discharged into Lake Ontario. They share the same pipe, but otherwise they are independent. But it just so happens that in sharing the same pipe, the waste stream from the village does travel all the way to the town sewer plant, which would potentially make logistically the consolidation more feasible in this particular arrangement. In 2016, conceptual discussions were had regarding consolidation. The town and the village are contemplating significant capital investments. It made sense. The leadership on both parts decided it would make sense to at least talk about why not make one larger investment, and or why should we? 2019, the joint study was approved. The findings from that study were concluded in August of 2020, and the village still, to its point, wanted to get more information about what a potential consolidation would look like. At that point, the language was being used, it was called regional. The working group decided to not really continue the use of that regional language, and the term has been a consolidated sewer district. So the sewer working group was formed at the behest of both the town and the village. So they both invited participants, town board and village board members, staff from the town and the village, residents from both entities, and business owners were sought from both entities as well. I was selected as the moderator to be the facilitator, not necessarily the chairman with a vote per se. The group largely came up with the recommendations amongst themselves. I just tried to keep the dialogue moving forward and make sure that there was some sort of progress being made towards the goals that the group was charged with. So that being said, the goals the group was charged with were two primary goals in the bullet points that are in front of you. The one was to identify and present to this joint session what was considered at that point in time the pros and the cons of operating a consolidated sewer system, including treatment and collections. In addition, and this point was one that we took most to heart, was present an equitable, feasible, and cost-effective path forward for a consolidated system. What we're not going to necessarily talk about tonight is the working group was not formed to provide a recommendation to the village board on whether or not it should consolidate. So we are not providing a recommendation to the board for that effect. Our recommendations are, should a consolidation be approached in some way, shape, or form, we put forth a path that we thought was equitable, feasible, cost-effective, and fair to both the town and the village. That was our charge. As part of that charge, in addition to those key goals, there was some what we call scope of work items that were assigned to us. Look at the organizational structure of a potential consolidated district. How could that be organized? Are there precedents taking place in other communities? Debt finance. How do you deal with debt in a situation such as this? Review of existing assets and infrastructure. How has that been dealt with? Including the collection system. Revenue generation opportunities. And of course, how would this impact potential for future growth within the community? The group met pretty much every other week early on, and then I held 6 or 7 separate meetings, and then we met pretty much weekly for the last month. The first meeting was in March. I would say that the time schedule for our charge was compressed. I think we had hoped that this could have been facilitated a little bit earlier, but the time constraints that the village is under, not of its own volition, but of the funding sources that it is seeking, has required us to move this forward a little bit faster than I think all of us would have liked. To that end, we came up with what we thought were some general recommendations. And I'm going to summarize those on the next slide, but this slide talks about the 6 key topic areas that were considered. Governance and operations. What options exist for governance and operations of a system where 2 consolidate into 1? Revenue. How do we share those revenue sources, and how do we even generate additional revenue? Is there flexibility? Collections. Who maintains it? How is that transferred? How is that funded? Infrastructure. Operations, maintenance, what happens to the actual land and the buildings, who continues to own the land and the buildings moving forward. Debt, there's multiple ways to deal with debt, and we'll talk about some conceptual options there. We think there's 3. And staffing, how do we treat, and this was, I would say that this last item, number 6, was easily the most unanimous sentiment of everybody in that room, in that working group. Felt, how do we treat the village employees fairly and equitably and ensure that they all have jobs and they're all treated as fairly and equitably as possible? It went without saying that everybody in the group felt that was very important. So I'm going to give a very high-level overview of these 6 areas from the recommendations that we're making, and then we're going to dive into it just a little bit further in detail. So number 1, for governance and operations. The working group felt that the full consolidation of the systems was the most likely going to be the most efficient and effective moving forward. That included both the treatment and the collection systems. And the village in that aspect would have a special district It would function as a special district within a consolidated sewer system. Revenue generation. A sewer reserve fund would be established up front and both into for an extended period of time, potentially in perpetuity, to service that village special district. It would be funded by village district users. Those funds would only go towards improvements and investments made within that special village district. So those costs would be controlled and constrained to investments required to maintain that existing system. Collections. A consolidated system itself would be actually responsible for the maintenance of the facility and of the collection system. Yet, what we discovered in our homework, we actually invited the executive director of Wayne County's Water and Sewer District to come, and he spoke at length about the efforts that they're undertaking. And one of the models that they suggested that they're using is the authority that they formed an authority. The authority maintains the district, and then any maintenance above a certain threshold dollar figure is then separately charged back to that special district in which that investment would need to be made. So if there was a pump station that needed to be reinvested in, that pump station investment, which would likely be above the threshold of a nominal figure of $10,000, that's a negotiable number. Anything above and beyond that figure would then be charged with, funded by that special district. And that's a way to control costs and protect users of the entire district. Infrastructure. It's recommended that the village treatment plant would be converted to a headworks-only facility where primary treatment of the influent, the first blush of treatment would take place, but the final stages of treatment would then be that stream of waste would be transferred and flowed down to the town's facility that would need to be improved to handle the extra flow, and the final treatment and discharge of the effluent would take place from the town's plant. The land and the buildings would be owned by the village. The village would maintain ownership of all land and buildings. There would be a lease back of any infrastructure that was being used by the consolidated system. That way the village would be able to utilize and maintain ownership and potentially construct additional buildings for storage or whatever its general needs would be. The village would maintain ownership of those facilities. Debt, there's multiple options, and I'm going to gloss over it now because there's a couple slides in that will talk about the debt options, but the discussion was retiring the debt, consolidating the debt, or just maintaining. So those were really conceptually the three options. And then finally, staffing, ensuring that all the village employees are retained and treated fairly in regards to their positions. So, in order to be as fair and equitable and efficient as possible, it was recommended by the working group that this take place over a transition period of 3 to 5 years. And that transition period, during the transition, there would be a set determined likely transition date that would be a negotiated date as well. But there would be a joint sewer, town and village sewer transition committee that would be formed to help craft an intermunicipal agreement. And then during that transition period, however, the village would be maintained as full autonomy over its sewer system for control, existing budget structure, operations. It would function as the entity through the transition period in preparation for transition and consolidation. However, the IMA should touch upon those 6 key elements that we discussed previously: governance, infrastructure, collections, revenue generation, debt and staffing, and there may be other items that get rolled into that. So as part of that consolidated, the transition to consolidation, the recommendations for governance and operations, we touched upon some of them. The formation of the committee, the village operating status quo, the formation of a village special sewer district. During that time period, a collections and operations and maintenance charge and a capital charge per, right now we call them EDUs, equivalent dwelling units. That's kind of how we measure the flow of sewer based on a 60,000 gallon operation, or 60,000 gallons per year. A separate charge would be established, and that would be determined based on the operation of the existing village district. So we would be able to take the time, work with the finance department, work with the sewer department, work with the DPW, and really dive in from a dollars and cents perspective and understand what it takes on on a cost per EDU, cost per user, what that charge should really be. To date, we don't know what that charge is. I think the village is heading in that direction, and it's done a lot of work towards determining what that exact charge would be for both the operations and then any sort of capital reserve. And I think the transition period would allow for that process to come to fruition and everybody to feel comfortable with that number. And then one of the suggestions was to actually rename the sewer system to the Webster Consolidated Sewer System, such that even in the branding of vehicles and letterhead, that village residents were part of, not the town, but they were part of a larger community entity that is just the Webster Consolidated System. Dealing with revenue, we got into a little bit of numbers here when we started talking about revenue. There's several different flows. There's residential flows, commercial and industrial flows, there's septage flows. We talked a lot about septage. I know a lot more now about septage than I probably really want to, but I feel it's good to know how these revenues are generated. So the sewer reserve fund that was mentioned earlier, it is recommended that would be started during this transition period by the village. In the village's current financial budget, they've allotted, well, there's an undistributed sum of funds, approximately $374,000, that we felt was obviously intended to build up a reserve fund. And that would continue to take place during the transition period. The example on the screen is a period of 4 years, which would basically provide a reserve fund approaching $1.5 million. And then at that point, upon transition, the establishment of that special sewer district within the consolidated system would take place, and that reserve fund would transfer. It would transfer out of the actual control of the village itself, but it would be set aside in use only for the village users within that district. So those monies would only be used towards offsetting costs for village users. There would be an agreement on the accretion and withdrawal of funds from that reserve to help offset and rebate EDU costs. So if the reserve fund grew to a point where it was unnecessarily large, that money could be then drawn down in a budget cycle or across budget cycles as a rebate to those EDU users. So the operations and maintenance charge for collections in the village district would be lower than it had been. On septage revenue, there's ideas about how to share that revenue, but if any septage receiving was undertaken on the village property, those revenues were determined to flow directly to the village as part of the district itself to help offset those EDU charges. So the overall goal was revenue would come in to this special district and would be set aside for village users within this special district and not just consolidated into a town-wide fund. They would be specific for village users. And then opportunities for future growth. We went back and forth on how we identify opportunities for future growth, but the screen is, I wish it was larger, so you could understand exactly the size and scope of just the area of which the town and village of Webster draw sewer flows. The blue lines up in here is Webster, the village, the boundaries in black here. there are potential areas that could be additionally serviced, based on anticipated land use patterns. A consolidated system would allow for the servicing of those areas to take place in a more efficient manner, largely because there'd be one entity that could coordinate any changes in pipe sizing, if there are bottlenecks in the system, or how do we take out of district charges and pass them through to the appropriate beneficiary, either being the village district itself or the larger townwide district. Collections. As stated previously, the village would maintain during this transition period 100% of the effort and expense of the system. Post-transition, the funding mechanism for that maintenance and operations would flow through the special district. The effort component would be from the consolidated sewer agency, which would mean the town would be responsible essentially for all the effort moving forward through through the combined, what is hopeful to be the combined forces. And then the village residents will pay that separate EDU charge, and that would be specific to the district that they reside in. Infrastructure, just trying to move through this as quickly as I can. The town would complete the system improvements for the treatment plant. The village treatment plant would be converted to the headworks. If there was the option for a septic receiving station at the village, and should that be the agreed upon location, those revenues would then flow to the village as described previously. Village to retain the ownership of the lands, a nominal lease back, probably even just $1, to be honest, $1 a year. Could be more, that's a negotiable term. And then this joint transition committee would establish the investments required during the transition and possibly for a period of 5, maybe 10 years. It would be an agreed upon investment in capital across the system. So then budgeting for that could be done up front, and then that budgeting would reflect EDU charges moving forward. And that budgeting element would happen in a joint capacity during the transition period. And so moving on to debt. We came across what we thought were three potential options, and they're all really negotiable options between the town and the village. Should the village decide to explore this further. Option one could be potentially to even pay off their debt. Right? Some of those funds, some of the reserve fund that was brought forth, could be used to retire the debt early, so that at the end of the transition period, the village could wipe its hands of its debt related to its sewer system by retiring it early, about 6 years early. Right now, we believe that 2032 is when the full debt would be retired. At least the debt that's on the books today would be retired in 2032. We estimate that it could be done by 2026. That would come at a cost. Obviously, the cost of paying down that debt early would reduce the amount of funds that you would put into the reserve that would help offset operations and maintenance for the special district. So there's a trade-off and a balance there. So option B would be to have that debt consolidated into the special district. And the reason you set up the special district is because in the eyes of New York State, there is actually a separate entity that could take on such debt, right? So that entity in the village special sewer district could take on this debt, get transferred into it. It could also take on additional debt should it need to, should the reserve fund not be sufficient to support unexplained or unanticipated capital investments that were required. The goal is to obviously avoid that and build up that reserve fund such that that would never be the case. And option C would be the village could maintain the debt. It wouldn't have to do anything with it. It could just retire it. It would establish its own additional EDU charge to pay down that debt within the allotted time frame of another approximately 11 years. There's so many different, the reason it's difficult to apply a number of dollar figures for like an EDU on that is because right now EDUs are $6,292. Next year it could be $6,100, and the following year it could be $6,000. We really don't know how large the user base will be within the village to spread these costs across, which is more of the ilk of why potential consolidation would be preferential and a full perspective, because the unknown risk of a smaller user base over time is something that could be eliminated on the village's part. It could be spread potentially. Certain costs, especially for those across the treatment perspective, would be spread across a much larger base of users. And finally, staffing. Town and village would essentially have individual agreements with those employees on how they can transition best from the village facility to the town plant based on their accreditation and their licensure, ensuring that they can maintain their compensation and benefit packages, and that they all keep their jobs. Luckily, we're not talking about 50 to 100 people. Luckily, it's a number of individuals that have worked hard, and we should be able to protect them moving forward. So, just in summary, the 6 topic areas again. This is just the same slide, but these are the 6 topic areas that we touched upon. Hopefully, we provided some food for thought on how we thought this could be organized. That being said, we are not providing specific recommendations on where we think EDU charges are going to be, or other recommendations regarding whether or not the village should consolidate. We think this is a viable option should it take that path. And with that, that is the conclusion of my presentation.
Very much, Matt. Appreciate work, collaboration at the town and the village participated together in putting this together and doing the research and the study and all that went into it. So sincerely appreciate that. Comments by the board?
I just want to thank the working group. I know it was not an easy task, so I appreciate everyone's efforts in that.
Thanks, Matt.
Do we ask any questions?
No attorneys.
Only regular people.
Go ahead and ask.
Where did the $374,000 a year number come from?
It came actually out of the village's 2021 budget. There is an undistributed funding number at the end of that. We pulled that number from there. Obviously, the treasurer should be able to provide quite a bit more detail on that.
Would you like me to speak to that?
No. But I thought part of that 374 was going to pay off the loan to the general fund.
That's the plan.
So it's not really 374, it's less than that.
Yes, much less.
Okay.
Well, according to the documents that we looked at, the 150 that you were going to put towards, at least there was, maybe you intended on having some of that come up, but we thought that there was another 150,000 that was already coming out towards that. Was that the number? 150,000 was going to go towards the general fund?
Yes.
Right, just a straight 150,000.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and that was going to happen over the next 2 years, right?
Correct.
I have lots and lots of questions.
Absolutely.
But I don't want to hog the floor. So should I just start and somebody like raise their hand if you want me to?
I'm going to let the mayor decide how he wants to handle this, but I'm here to answer questions to the best of my ability.
If they are specific, then Matt can answer.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious why the pros and cons did not come to fruition. I was hoping to see those.
Right. So the pros and cons, we actually had quite a bit of discussion regarding how do we identify the pros and the cons. And when we go back to, well, forgive me, I'm going to have to go back all the way so we can look at that slide. But it makes sense to do so we can read it. The committee spent quite a bit of time in the first, I would say, 3 meetings where we tried to talk about pros and cons of consolidation. And then it became apparent that the committee was bogging itself down in trying to identify what it felt was a recommendation on why the board should consolidate or not, why the village should consolidate or not. And we didn't want to make such recommendation. That wasn't truly the charge of the group to make the recommendation. The charge was the second one, to present a fair and equitable, cost-effective plan for a consolidation should the village choose to do so. However, in an effort to not speak around your question, to try and answer it directly, several pros and cons were discussed, and there's actually a report that we're going to hopefully finalize here that will include those elements. Unfortunately, a lot of them were very subjective elements. It was difficult to identify rational, fact-based pros and cons based on the information that we had and the time that we had to collect the information.
Okay.
So there was, rather than us try and debate one another going back and forth on whether or not we thought that was really a pro or that was a con, we tried to move the committee forward because we only had a set amount of time. And I'm just being honest, there was easily room to sit and debate the pros and cons for an entire, we could have done it for 40 hours, but we only met for 60 to 75 minutes at a crack because they were all volunteers.
That makes sense.
So,
Okay.
that's the reason why.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering, you pointed out revenue generation opportunities for the consolidated system. Did you touch on how those might differ from revenue generation opportunities for the 2 separate entities?
Correct. The revenue generation opportunities were discussed. Obviously, it was felt by the working group that there was, and it was brought up by a couple different members of the working group, that there was the potential for competition for revenue, right? And the hope was that that wouldn't take place, that there wouldn't, that the town and the village wouldn't be competing against one another for septage, for things such as that, or to be competing against one another on their rates to attract industrial users. The hope is that we would avoid that and be able to identify ways that should sources of revenue flow through the village, that those could be maintained by the village, like septage receiving at its plant would flow into the benefit of the village. The village put in that infrastructure, it paid for the village users, paid for the debt on that infrastructure, they should benefit from the revenue associated with that infrastructure.
Okay. I believe later in the presentation that it was suggested that the village with the headworks be potentially the sole source of septage processing. Do I have that right?
That's that would likely be, that would be an agreed upon element, and whether or not they could. There are limitations associated with based on legal arrangements and legal requirements. There's a limitation for what sort of waste streams can come into that location, septic versus leachate. There would need to be more analysis of which would make better sense in the long term. Do we anticipate growing flows of septage or lessening flows of septage? Where's the most cost-effective way to accommodate that? There was some on the committee or on the working group that felt the village makes the most sense because it's coming in upstream and could be mixed with the watery flow from Xerox, and it would actually be better off for everybody to do it upstream versus downstream, and versus, you know, so we did have dialogue regarding that, but time constraints and expertise constraints were came to fruition. We're not the engineers.
Understandable. Okay. Let's see. Can you clarify what the advantage would be of the special district? If I understand it correctly, the village would establish this reserve fund and then roll it over to the special district where we would still be managing and controlling it. So
conceptually that was not to be managed or controlled by the village. It would be managed and controlled by the town to be applied to the village district only.
Okay, so I don't want this to sound, biased or whatever, but it sounds like the village would be building up this nest egg and then we would turn it over to the town to manage and control?
Well, I think the joint town and village transition team would help establish what the ground rules were for that fund. And then that committee or that entity, we actually had quite a bit of dialogue regarding how do we maintain village a level of control and involvement on the part of the village. We discussed that at length. It was felt that a committee would be established that would help understand how those charges are determined, such that the village would have a voice at the table.
Okay.
But that fund is specifically for the geographic boundaries of the village district, so it couldn't be applied to a pump station in the town.
Right. Could you explain a little bit more? You said that there's some entity that can take on, like, I couldn't write fast enough, but you said one of the reasons for setting up a special district is that because it's a certain kind of entity that can handle debt in a different way?
So, the town has special districts already established. So if the town conducts a sewer extension, right, new service to an area that doesn't already have sewer, those users are in their own special sewer district. They will pay for the sewer mains going along the street per household. And they'll also pay their EDU charges that they need, that everybody else pays. So they'll pay in addition. So it's similar to that. So debt can be associated with those special districts. So that would be an avenue for the consolidation of that.
Okay. I guess I'm still a little bit stuck on why the village would not just retain its own fund for its own share of the work, but I think that
I think it could.
Parked on that enough.
I think it could. I think that's definitely a point that could be negotiated between the two entities. Absolutely.
Okay. Should I keep going? Okay. I'm not exactly sure how.
Neither am I.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Granted. Right, I'm gonna skip down.
I'm doing my best to appease your questions because I want to, but I don't want to sound as if we have all the answers.
Oh yeah,
There's so many fine details that would need to be negotiated as part of this, which is why we're suggesting such an extended transition period. We don't want the similar vein that happened with other transitions of other utilities to be done with the flip of a switch, apparently, right? I mean, that's how it's felt. There's no question about it.
Right.
This should not happen in that vein. An orderly transition should take place, and all of these elements should be negotiated.
Okay. Post-transition, the town would be responsible for ongoing maintenance, repair, and service calls. Would the town be committed to providing the same degree of particularly emergency service that the village now provides?
I don't pretend to speak for the town's sewer district, but obviously the expectation would be that.
Okay.
It's a good question. I don't know how you measure commitment level, but that was.
Okay. So for the different treatments of the debt, I think I'm almost done. It looks to me as though in each of these permutations, the village residents are paying the entire debt in each case. Am I misreading that?
No.
Okay. Okay, that's everything. Thank you so much for all your hard work, you and the whole group.
You're welcome.
Question.
Jeff will open it up. Yes, sir.
Yes, Matt, with respect to the sewer reserve fund, in looking at the budget for the village for next year, on page 19, it has a $1 million amount showing as the balance, as a deficit. Is that part of this analysis? I mean, you deal with, it's $374,000 a year. Does that number ring a bell?
There are the in-depth analysis of the village's finances was not undertaken. We didn't undertake an analysis with such fidelity. The $374,000 number was literally a line item that came out of there. How the deficits or debts ongoing, and one of the key elements that we didn't necessarily touch upon that's probably missing from this is the costs associated with ongoing retirement, the payment of ongoing retirement benefits into the future, which is a sizable number.
Could I interject? I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything you said. Are you referring to it's almost 1.5 million deficit as compared to the 36-ish thousand from the year before?
I'm just looking at the document that was posted, and it says it's $1 million deficit.
There was a recent change in how we are required to report our obligations as far as retirement and pension and health coverage for retirees. So formerly we didn't have to report all of that liability, but now we do. So on our books, it looks horrible, but really we're in the same position or better as we were the year before.
So these retirement, So these retirement costs, how do they relate to this sewer fund?
They wouldn't change. It's the only thing with that deficit is that is, I don't want to say that it's only on paper, but it's it does not represent a debt that the village needs to repay. It's just something that we will owe over many years.
What's included in that debt? How long has that amount of debt been?
The 1.5 million?
The 1 million.
It isn't money that the village borrowed.
Yeah, it's not really a debt. It's just
It's a
it's the present value of what future retirement costs are going to be. That a couple of years ago, I don't know, it was the federal and the state government said that every municipality now has to account for that on their balance sheet. If you probably look at the town, they got an even bigger deficit number for future retirement because they have a lot more employees. So it really is a paper debt. It's not real. It gets paid off over time as as the retirement system. The village has to make an annual contribution to the state retirement system. It's not like the state's going to say all at once you have to come up with $1 million to pay for the next 20 years of your retirees. So it's a little misleading, but they're required to show it on the financial statement.
Yeah,
Really, I think the sewer fund does not have a fund balance. It's really at zero right now. Okay? And what the village was hoping to start to do with this year's budget was contribute not all of the $374,000, but at least a portion of it to start building up a fund balance again. But it's right now it's at zero for the sewer fund. Okay?
Yes, sir. Please step to the podium.
My name's James Watson. I live over here on Lapham Park in Webster. My family's been here since 1961 in one form or another, living here, and it just seems over time we get caught up in the politics of the village and the town. I've come in late on this, but I guess my main question is we haven't heard anything tonight that talks about where you are with the infrastructure and what the maintenance is going to be. Say with the town's sewer system as it exists, we're almost into 2022 budget seasons. Where are you going to be in 2030? How much money is going to need to be put into the town versus the condition of the village sewer system as it is now, and how much is going to have to put into that by the village residents? Or are the village going to become a facilitator and funder of maintenance of the town? And that would be my biggest concern. In the 8 years we've been here, our taxes have gone up 225% in 8 years. So what impact is this going to have on the village residents and the taxpayers of the village if we're put in a position of at some point, and I don't know the condition, maybe the town sewer system is better than the village at this point. But we haven't heard anything about the maintenance and what the perspective is going to be in the future of maintenance and upgrades over the next 8 years, and who's going to bear the cost of those. Because once the village moves into it, you're going to become an equal partner, I would assume, in the ownership of maintaining the larger sewer system. I'd like to hear that, or at least have the board consider that, before you get in over your heads and all of a sudden it comes back and flows backwards to the taxpayers of the village. Thank you.
That kind of dovetails into a question I had for you, Matt. It seems to me, so the sewer rent, you know, you propose it'll include a charge for collection, operation and maintenance, and capital, right? Whether it's the special village district or the town district. So it would seem to me, isn't the concept that the O&M charge would be identical for the village and the town, right? Because that's basically the consolidated plan.
So the charges towards the treatment components would be identical.
Right.
The charges towards the collection systems would be separate.
And then you talked about this threshold above which the village would have to pay extra. So is the concept that this threshold is going to be whatever the cost is to the town to maintain its collection system? Because just the same, the town has 20 some odd pump stations. The village has what, three. The odds are that there's going to be more expense maintaining town pump stations than village pump stations. If the town pump station goes, why should village taxpayers pay for that if town taxpayers aren't paying for the repair of a village?
I don't think the concept was that they would.
Yes, and well, that's what you said in your presentation. You used the pump station as an example. In the collection system, you said that
the collection systems from a financial perspective were considered that they could be separated.
Yeah, but this threshold has to be, like, you got to use...
That's on the maintenance perspective. So lining up the pipes, cleaning up, you know, working with cleanouts, doing things on a daily maintenance perspective. That would be done as part of, an example was what is done in Wayne County. That would be done with one...
But for example, so if this regular, in the town, just in the town program, if they incurred something in their collection system above and beyond these regular maintenance charges, who pays for that? Does everybody? Town and village?
You'll have to forgive me, we were touching buttons over here. Was that in the town? You're talking about an expense in the town's consolidation system?
Yes.
I think the effort of separating the two out was to protect both town and village users. So the village users would continue to be responsible for the maintenance of the collection system within the existing network.
And the town would be solely responsible for the collection system outside of the village?
As far as
So it seems
as far as the improvements would go.
well, not just improvements, but it seems to be the town then, to be fair, or to be the same, any expenses above this threshold of regular maintenance, whether it's in the town or the village. If it's in the village pays for it. If it's in the town pays for it.
I would agree that would make sense.
Okay, so that's just a little different. Well, that's just not included in.
There's probably a lot of questions that need to be answered. That's a good point you brought up.
Okay.
Real quick, you mentioned
I
Wayne
mean,
County.
the impression is that I have all the answers in that,
Well, I know you- I know
that
you-
we've come up with a final agreement. This is not the elements of this transition and this agreement between the town and the village. We just touched upon 6 conceptual areas that we felt were the ones that should be highlighted.
Well, I
The litany of questions that are out there, and I'm sure you could bring up a zillion more, and I'll do my best to answer them, but
I just want to be able to understand it on a macro level, just so that if the village board has any questions, I can help them try to answer it between now and, I guess, 2 weeks when they got to make a decision.
I hope, Matt, that I made it clear when I was grilling you that, I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you were presenting, and if there were any thoughts behind that you could share. But, I don't expect you to have answers. That wasn't your job.
And Marcia, a lot of the questions you're asking, which are great questions, I think Matt alluded to during that time period of the 2 to 3 years this takes, is when all those things would be talked about and decided. Maybe what Don is saying is perfectly the way it could go, but you just don't know that now. That's not giving us that direction. I think he was pretty clear that that's not what this working group was doing.
I just have a question, and for the record, I do expect you to have all the answers, Matt. You mentioned Wayne County a couple times as an example. Do you know what their rates are, or their success with this consolidation, and what do their residents pay? Matt,
you mean on an EDU?
Yes.
perspective?
Yeah.
I mean, they mentioned what they pay on a per EDU perspective, but their EDU numbers are significantly lower. So the cost to put in a system, any system, there's a base level cost. But I do believe that both town and village are performing exceptionally below what we would consider normal EDU charges across the state. EDU charges in some municipalities could be, $500 or more. In some areas over in Albany, they're in excess of $1,000 for EDU. So it's to be commended that the town and the village can provide the services that they do at the cost that they do. That being said, we're so affordable that it's almost laughable. How inexpensive it is for us to maintain our services.
You mentioned, yeah, just to fill in just a little bit.
Thank you, sir.
Matt is correct. Right now, in Wayne County, the charges are at $500, and they're going up. Right now, we're at, I believe, like around 195 to 192 for the EDU charges. Okay, so you're relatively inexpensive at this point in time. The way they're set up over there is that they've taken 5 different communities and they've combined them all into one main treatment facility, or possibly two facilities for treatment. And everybody takes care of, in some instances, the authority takes care of their systems. In other areas, the municipality takes care of their systems. The ceiling you were talking about a moment ago, they have it roughly set at 10,000. Okay, so let's say for instance in Marion, they have a pump station that they have to rebuild completely. They will pay up to the 10,000 or 10 million. Oh no, 10,000. I'm sorry, is the ceiling. Anything above that then the authority would come in, take care of it, and then those extra charges above that would then go back to the municipality solely, not the total district, but just back to the municipality, that then they would either take it out of their reserve funds or they would have to be billed for that, and their rate may be a little bit higher, okay? So it's a system in which everything is negotiated. Once everything's negotiated, there's a whole set of rules that everybody plays by, okay? It's not that one entity does one thing and somebody else pays for it. If you have something happens to go wrong, that area takes care of it, and if it exceeds their limits, then there's extra charges that will be put onto the EDUs, okay? So it turns out to be an equitable type of arrangement where the whole district, the only time that the whole district pays for something is if something needs to be done either by a mandate by the DEC or the higher authority. It has to be done at the plant. Then that goes into your overall EDU charges. Okay? Does everybody understand that? Okay.
Dave,
Yes.
state your name.
Me?
Thank you.
My name's Dave Galeazzo. I had the honors of serving this community for 35 years, so I have a little bit of interest and involvement. So this needs to go down like this so you can hear me. No, it goes up here. But again, we did a lot of different things and looked at a lot of different things, and what it boils down to is, like everything else, it comes down to economics, and somebody's got to make a decision. That's the bottom line, guys. Okay? I'm done.
So Matt, one last question.
Fire away.
And as Dave said, Wayne County uses an authority.
An authority.
Much like Pure Waters is an authority in Monroe County. Did you consider establishing an authority to run the consolidated system rather than it being under the control of the town? And if you rejected an authority, how come?
Our research included there's authorities that are formed. There are local development corporations that are formed. There are separate consolidated sewer districts that are formed. There's probably three primary, those would be the three primary mechanisms. Why did we not choose the authority as the final recommendation? I think the sentiment of the group was that level of complexity was unnecessary for the number of parties involved being just the town and the village. So we felt that there was no need to create a whole separate governance entity and a whole another layer of government. We felt it could be done without that level of complexity.
Follow up on that, I guess. You discussed in the town or the village as a special district, and then you described special districts within the town that they use for extensions or for capital improvements that are specific to one site. But if an improvement went in 30 years ago and that is settled on that in the town, that's what I'm talking about, they still have a fee for collections as part of the regular fee, and then the special district fee would be something on top of the regular treatment or O&M cost for treatment, and collections is mixed in with that. So from a village resident standpoint, if we're a special district in terms of collection, and the town for this consolidated sewer plant or sewer entity had an issue with part of the collection system, those funds would come out of what the normal non-special district fees would be, right? So the village resident would pay for their own collection system, but then also collect part of a portion of stuff that happens within the town and those special?
No, I think that's what Don was trying to get at, is where there would be a line in the sand. Obviously, that special district fund conceptually as we described. Still conceptual, lots of things to be ironed out. The reserve fund would be established for the village collections district. And those funds would get used solely towards the village collections district. So the village should not pay for improvements to the collection system on Apple Grove, right? If there's a sewer break there, they should be paying for a sewer break only on Heffner Drive, right?
So what I'm
And
saying,
the intention is to actually, it's a protection for both the town and the village. It's easy for this body to think about how is it protecting us, but I think that from the town's perspective, the town ratepayers are also going to want to understand how they're protected from expenses incurred in village infrastructure. So the goal is to try and draw that separation and identify a funding mechanism. How do we gather those funds and then allocate those funds?
yeah, it's just, for example, like right now, the town rate is 167 for O&M, I think it's 23 for capital. That 167 for O&M covers the collection system and treatment at the plant, and the capital will be any of the debt service for those things. If you live in an area where there was a recent extension or a capital improvement, that would be where the special district would be coming and pay for those.
And there would be, obviously, the charge would be higher than the 193.
Right, absolutely. So when I'm getting that core 167 for operation and maintenance, that would have to be separated out for treatment component and collection component for the town.
Correct. So the village is only paying for the treatment component.
Yes,
sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yep. The town would have some rejiggering of its EDU charges to do as well to make sure that it was equitably only charging village ratepayers for the components that they were
The
using.
consolidated sewage treatment and sewage would then effectively take two entities to make three. The town collection, the village collection, and the combined consolidated treatment.
Yeah, I agree with Jake. I think if you use the Wayne County analogy.
I think you're using the term entity loosely.
Well,
there's one agency.
Well, right, but if you use Wayne County, the town would actually be wearing two hats. They would be sitting as the authority, because you don't want to, you said you didn't feel you needed an authority, but they'd still be like the town of Marion too. If something happened with them, you know, there's 5 towns. Well, you know, the town of Webster should also, the town residents, as Jake said, they should have to pay for improvements and or repairs above the ordinary for its collection system, just as the village residents would do within the village, to be fair.
May I
I see what you're saying, and I think you're bringing up a valid distinction that would need to be made to make it fair and equitable.
Yeah, that's the gentleman in the hat. He's been trying to get up there. Oh, well, you go first. And then we'll let you.
My comments quick. I'm Bruce Winters. I'm a...
Sorry, we won't be able to hear you on the feed. I apologize.
My name is Bruce Winters. I'm a resident in the village. My comment is quick with regards to the comment about authorities. If authorities can be avoided, my personal opinion is they ought to be avoided. All you have to do is look around New York State at the Thruway Authority, the Power Authority, etc. And essentially what they can become, don't have to become, are little fiefdoms that are basically unaccountable to the taxpayer.
Yeah, my only reason I brought up the authority is, and this is a concern that the village board should have, if it's the town that basically, it would be the town board that would control the budget for the consolidated sewer plant. And how would the village have any input in that if it weren't an authority?
The effort was suggested as part of the working group that we would be able to avoid that via, what did we talk about? We created that work, essentially that committee, right? It was a joint town village.
It was all being done through an intermunicipal agreement.
Right.
But there would be, in that 3 to 5 year period, there would be a group of individuals that would be representative from town, village, residents, commercial people, and business people that would be involved in making decisions and making, finding out what costs and what needs would need to be done to not only our district, but the town district, as well as to what maybe improvements would need to be done at the town plant. It would be all together and be able to discuss what the needs are so that there would be a level playing field for the costs. Because it wouldn't necessarily be being done at all at one time. It would be done over a period of time. The information would be spread. And again, we didn't want to get into any kind of an authority, because we already realized what the issue is with an authority. So that's why we wanted to do it with all intermunicipal agreement if possible.
So the IMA would be crafted by this joint town, would be, the drafting of it would be assisted by the formation of this joint town-village committee, and the tenure of that committee could be just during the transition period, or it could be decided that some entity to ensure that there's proper voice for both parties that are being heard into the decisions for this consolidated system. That was the mechanism. It wasn't in a formal method where there would be an authority with a board and an executive director and a whole separate level of government that would be above and beyond what it would normally take. We thought that could be done at, I should say, a little bit more at the parochial level through the IMA. But you bring up a good point about control, interest. How do we provide feedback and interest and have some level of accountability in holding everybody accountable towards these costs long term?
Yeah, it goes beyond 3 to 5 years. I'm talking.
Well, I mean, obviously, right, the transition is this period where we determine these mechanisms. There's certain things that are going to outlive the transition, and likely that mechanism would need to be one of them. I know you don't agree.
No, I agree. I'm just trying to, I'm not so sure a contract is the proper mechanism to ensure that the village has a voice in
Perfect. That's
in
a perfect. That's a perfect.
In operating the town.
That's a perfect negotiating point during the agreement between the town and the village.
We're saying we're going to buy the car before we know what the deal is. We're going to say, yep, that's the car we want, now let's go in and tell me how much I'm going to pay.
No.
I'm just
I don't
saying.
think anybody really knows the full cost yet. I think there's a lot more.
No, forget about the costs. I just think people maybe shouldn't just throw the authority idea out the window because of bad experiences with the New York State Thruway Authority or the New York Power Authority. Those are, that's on a level.
On the Water Authority.
We're not even approaching. And couldn't this authority, the board of directors of the authority, be, three town board people and 2 village board people?
Absolutely.
And so you're not creating, in essence, you're really not creating another level of government. Maybe it's on paper only.
Wow.
But at least
the responsibilities in the government side for authorities are pretty extensive. A local development corporation, similar to the Alliance, is exactly what the Alliance is.
If a local development
Right.
corporation can run a sewage treatment plant,
Sure.
okay, I'd be open to that idea.
They can own it. They can own. They can operate. It could be an LDC. They do that in other locations. I think down in the Ithaca area they're choosing.
Well, that may make sense.
The LDC route is they're choosing it down.
But you'd still, so the LDC would have a board of directors that would consist of village and town representatives.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
You just get where we're coming from.
I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Okay.
Everything is open for debate.
Yes, sir.
Hey, thank you, Mayor Byers. You mind if I make a few comments?
Okay.
Okay. Well, first I should state my name. I'm Tom Flaherty, a proud resident of the community of Webster. Although I guess my home for the last 20 years, 24 years has been in the town of Webster. I will say that until I became supervisor a year and a half, I really was not aware of just how tribal the village of Webster is versus the town of Webster. But I've gotten quite an education in the last 18 months, and since I'm a historian, it's been interesting. But I won't take up a lot of the citizens' time tonight. I do appreciate everything that the committee, the special work group did on this. It's been pleasant for me to get to meet Dave Galeazzo, and Dave, to watch how you were very open-minded from what I've heard, and came up with some of the good ideas for the global way to handle it. I've gotten a chance to work with Don White, and I'd like to thank Don. Your questions, counselor, are great tonight. You are representing your client. I'll let you decide if in good faith you think the town has operated in good faith with you on certain IMAs on the $12 million phase one. With that being said, I just wanted to mention a few things. I call it putting the 800-pound gorilla on the table. So these are 5 things that I think that I just want to make sure that this is just my opinion. I think these have been spun, or they are myths in my opinion. Number 1 is that this is a village decision. The reality is this is both a town board decision and a village board decision. Now, it's been spun, I think, that it's a village board decision because they have this $5 million interest-free loan that they got to make a decision on. But the reality is, since this all started 4 or 5 years ago, or at least when I walked in the door a year and a half ago, the rules of engagement were basically handed to me that, well, this is how it works. You keep your collections, you keep your debt, and we'll talk about employees. And the day I heard that as an accountant and somebody who didn't have a dog in the fight of tribalism, I said, well, I'm not married to that. I'm open-minded. I want to look at facts. And so as the facts were presented out, I became open-minded, and I tried to say to Mayor Byers and Deputy Mayor Ippolito that I thought there was opportunities to have some of that debt be consumed or taken on by the consolidated system, especially the stuff associated with the headworks. As you can see from the recommendation of this working group, it has collections being consolidated. 18 months ago, that was not on the table. So you have 4 town board members over here that, I know this was the first time I've seen this, contrary to popular belief. So I don't know if they are going to decide to go with these terms. So I appreciate that all the village board members and DPW and the village attorney have asked questions tonight that make it sound as though the village is being run by the town. But the reality is this is a very different set of circumstances that were just shown than the town board previous had looked at. This will end up being a joint decision of the town board and the village board. Myth 2. The town is trying to balance the budget on the backs of the village citizens. Mr. Watson, where are you? You kind of alluded to that as one of your concerns.
No, sir.
Okay?
I never talked about the town budget. Never talked about the village budget. I talked about the infrastructure and not knowing what the next 8 or 9 years of repair work and upgrades to respective systems were going to be.
Thank you.
And it's how that's going to be.
And then as the questions went around, it was very obvious to anybody who English is their first language, it's a very good concern. As an accountant, as a numbers guy, if the village makes up 30%, and I'm making up a number, the town makes up 70% of whatever, and it ends up in this, that the agreement that the town only has to pay 60% and the village pays 40%, that's awful. That is the village getting ripped off by the town. And that's something that I wouldn't advocate for in a million years. So where this working group basically came out with a global recommendation to put together a committee or whatever you want to call it to work out the fine details, I think something missing here tonight is that a lot of your questions are to Matt for those fine details. Those aren't there. Now, Jake, you used the term that, well, it's like buying a car without seeing and all that. I couldn't agree with you more. But the reality is that we, the town, jumps into that same risk. So we would have to sit down and make sure that it is fair and equitable. That's my compass of decision making. The third myth, well actually I should say this, because it sticks with the second myth of the town trying to pull one over. The village board up here represents approximately 5,000 constituents. They're voted by the village residents. 5,000, approximately. The town of Webster is approximately 46,000 citizens. That town board and myself as a supervisor get voted by them. Mr. Watson, did you vote for the supervisor and the town board members?
I didn't vote for either.
Do you have the ability to vote for them?
I'm a resident in Florida, and I was supposed to understand.
Boy, did I? He's not my straight man, I'll tell you that, is he? Okay? All right? So actually, we shouldn't listen to him because he doesn't live here in the village, you just said. Who's a village resident who votes?
That's true.
Because he's not going to play with me. When you go to the voting booth in 19 and 21, does your voting thing have for town board members and supervisor?
When the town board is...
It does, because your 5,000 citizens of the village are constituents of the town. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands something. I see the supervisor position, and I certainly see the town board positions, as a stewardship fiduciary position for our 46,000 constituents. The 5,000 constituents in the village are not second-class citizens in my eyes. I want to make sure that they're taken care of fair and equitably, just like the 41,000 citizens in the town. They're my constituents too. Myth 3. I love this one. The village sewer plant and system is better than the town system. Well, the reality is they're different. Currently, they're different. First of all, 85% of the flow into the town system is residential. And without getting into technicalities, like you said, a septic, Matt, residential is your toilets. So the heaviness of what gets processed at our plant is more so than 85% of the village's flow is commercial, of which 56% of the village's flow is from Xerox, and it's mostly a watery thing. Well, I'm not a scientist, but I will tell you what I have learned, that it is easier and more efficient to process water through a sanitary sewer than to process the solids that come from our residential toilets. So, yeah, I guess if you want to go by the fact that it's more efficient, the village sewer, well, right now what's feeding into the village sewer is easier to process in today, 2021. Also, part of being better, when I was here in August, or when we did a Zoom meeting, was that financially, if the EDU charge of the town is $187, and the EDU charge of the village is $150, well then obviously, financially, the village must be better than the town. That's what was said to me back in August. I mean, how can $150, which is so much less than $187, it's got to be better, right? Well, here's the reality. The village is just in the infancy stage of figuring out a sewer fund and not having all of their sewer finances run through their general fund. I don't say that to take a shot at the village. I'm saying it as a fact. And within that process, I think the first time they had an EDU rate on the tax bill for the citizens of the village was approximately 4 years ago. Something like that. And it started out as $98. Is that correct? And this year, for 2021-22, it was raised from $150 to $195. Now the village EDU rate for citizens is now $195. The town is $192. So should I argue that the town sewer plant is better than the village? I wouldn't do that, because I would be a one-trick pony basing that on a factor that is just one factor of multiple when it comes to what is better. say one last time, the village sewer plant and their approximate 7,000 EDUs flowing through in today is approximately 85% commercial. The majority of that being Xerox. I think, Mr. Chamber, your businesses make up the second, maybe biggest commercial. The town has 17,000 EDUs, but 85% of them are homes. Myth number 4, I've only got 2 to go, all right? Not going to hog all the time. Is that the myth of the future that the village is better to stay on their own and they have a $5 million interest-free loan and they're going to need some more money than that, I'm sure everybody knows, for this first round of asset replenishment. Well, the reality is that, do you realize, and I want to make sure everybody thinks about what I have to say. They really have an open mind to this. Every person I have talked to that doesn't have the Hatfield, McCoy, Town of Webster, Village of Webster, 50 years background of whatever reasons that's happened, people at the DEC, people in Albany who do the funding and the grants, unsolicited by me, say, why would a 35 square mile community of 46,000 citizens consider in 2021 putting X million dollars into this plant and another X million dollars into this plant? It makes no sense. That's what everybody outside of the 35 square miles thinks. The granting opportunities from the various state agencies, they incentivize consolidation. That's a fact. But here we are, and I understand why, having this discussion about potentially putting in $8 million, $10 million into a village plant in the next 2 years, and the town's already put $12 million into phase 1 of their plant, and we're about to venture into phase 2 of putting another however many $1 million in. Well, here's the thing. And I like to break down as an accountant. I learned over the years that when I go to financial presentations, accountants get up there and they're not really good at presenting because they present in their language and the layman can't understand it. So over the years I've learned how to basically describe things that we can come back to our own personal family budgets. The village has approximately a $3 million annual budget. Is that correct, Mayor? $3 million, all right? Does everybody know what that means? The village brings in $3 million of revenue, a lot of it from sales tax, some of it from real estate taxes that are to the village residents. With that $3 million of revenue, they provide the services that the village does to the commercial business and the residents, including a sewer. If the village goes into debt $8 million, whether it's got a 0% interest rate or a 1% interest rate, it is tantamount to the town of Webster, who has a $35 million budget annually, going into debt about $90 million. Did everybody understand that correlation? Let's go to that car thing, Jake. So your daughter makes 20 grand a year, okay? And she wants to buy a $100,000 Maserati and go into debt for it. Well, let's say you make $200,000 a year, and I hope you don't, Jake, because if we consolidate, that's a lot of money we're going to have to take in. Who is more apt to, one, be approved for the $100,000 debt? His daughter making 20 grand a year, or him making $200,000 a year? It's a simple question because we all know the answer. The village going into an $8 million loan on their own in a plan right now to basically replace 1970 technology with the same technology but a 2020 model. And then the plan is that Labella has done with the village is that then in about 7 years they'll do phase 2 of that for another however many million. That would concern me. As the supervisor of the town and the 5,000 constituents, that I take a lot of responsibility to make sure that things are done for their benefit. As an accountant, based on those finances, that concerns me. Now during this process, I got a chance to meet Marcia Adams, who is the village treasurer. And tonight, when, and I don't remember which gentleman it was, said, what about that $1 million deficit? And Marcia, I try to be fair. I don't spin things. I looked at you and said, you can answer that, can't you? Because we talked about this the other day. It's not $1 million deficit. It's really more of a break even, maybe even a $100,000 surplus. But the reality is, the town, on their audited financial statements for their sewer fund, has, in their last audited financial statements between their sewer reserve and their fund balance, has $6.1 million. The village, as they said before, is at about at zero. If that is the comparison, a $35 million entity, agency, a government agency budget that has a $6 million surplus that has been built up over managing it correctly over the years, and the village has a $3 million budget really still figuring out how to do their sewer fund separately from their general fund. I don't mean that as a shot, it's just a reality. And now you're going to go into, on your own, $8 million in debt.
Oh, I should have brought my hip boots.
That concerns me as the supervisor for the 5,000 constituents that I represent. And that leads me to my last myth. If you've been reading letters to the editors, if you've been on social media, if you take the door hangers that certain people go around in the village, the town, and I guess I represent the town, is a bully. And we're trying to force our way, and go back to myth 1, because we want to screw the village. We want to take advantage of them. Well, the reality is this. I want to protect the village. I want to protect the 5,000 constituents that are people that vote for me and voted me to be a fiduciary steward of them. And so if it's come across as being a bully, that maybe I'm on top of the mountain yelling, have you looked at this? Have you really looked at this with open eyes? Have you looked at, when I hear that they're saying, well, we'll get 200,000 in septage. We'll have Chamberlain come over and we'll start septage again. Well, I just said to you, the village is building a plant that unless something's changed, Labella Engineers is just asset replenishing. The town's plant, which I hope is our community's plant, is going to build state-of-the-art technology so that the septage that comes in is so light when it comes out, it's like coffee pellets, that we have no cost or very minimal cost to sludge hauling. Now my predecessor is here tonight so he can corroborate this. Sludge hauling. In 2019, Supervisor Nesbitt got up on the podium during the budget process, I should say it was in, 2019. And he said, let me tell you one of the reasons why the budget is going up next year for the town. The $250,000 cost to haul away the rest of that septage, the solids, is going to $500,000. The reason it went double is because, well, this will shock everybody, the landfills around that take that, they're closing. And then the one that we go to right now is closing in 2026. And this will shock you, there's not a lot of communities out there that are pining to open a new landfill. So we're looking at this because we're taxed, no pun intended, as leaders, to be visionary and look and do our due diligence, see that, and say, you know what? We're going to be held hostage to this sludge hauling in years to come. By 2026, if we got to haul this stuff 500 miles away, that could cost $2 million a year. So we're going to build where we will dry that out. Now, unless I've missed something, I have not heard that the town's asset replenishment has looked into that technology. So they're thinking they're going to take $200,000 of septage as a village-only plant. But the reality is, it's just basic economics. We're going to have this plant that has septage dried out to where there's no cost, and if we have no cost to haul it, and the village's plant has cost to haul it, don't you think we're going to be able to charge less for that? So the village will end up getting no revenue from that. Now, does that make me a bully? I loved this idea of consolidating the septage and the revenue sharing. It's fantastic. That's what we should be doing. I want the village residents, I want village commercial businesses to benefit from that state-of-the-art technology that we're going to put on that community campus. Because that state-of-the-art technology, in my opinion, and I go back to what I said about being visionary, not tying yourself into the past, in the past Hatfield, McCoy, and all that stuff of the village and town. Because when Xerox's campus, that 800-acre campus, which, as you may or may not know, has 4 million of its 6 million square feet of buildings is empty. 4 million is empty. Here's the trend of Xerox the last 15 years. Xerox is 56% of the village sewer plant's EDU flow. Is that correct?
Amazing you know these numbers, but not how much it'll cost our village residents. We still, after 4 years, don't know how much it'll cost our residents. That's remarkable to me. But yes.
Well, I know this. I know this. That what I'm struggling with, Jake, and this comes down to the bully thing, and this is what, and I was in a meeting with Marcia the other day, and with Paul Adams, our finance director, and I said what I'm really concerned about is that as the supervisor of this town, this community, who oversees even the 5,000 citizens in the village, I personally think that $8 million of debt, whether it's interest-free or not, the interest rates are so low, the delta, the difference between an interest rate and a zero interest rate loan is not going to make that big of a difference to the fact of, are you overburdening yourself? So, as I said to Marcia and to the crew, once I had that realization, then the real problem comes up is, well now, if we do consolidate, how do I advocate and work with the crew to make sure that we're not making it so advantageous to the village, because I want to protect them, that we're doing it on the backs of the town. Think about that. Because it's got to be fair and equitable. And the whole time everybody saw the fair and equitable is that the town is trying to pull one over on the village. And from my feelings is to make this work so that the village stays as a village government. Now, I won't get into the sixth myth. Nobody in the town wants the village government to go away. Nobody wants that. The town board is not going to be the one that ultimately would make the village as a separate entity go away. As I've looked in the last 20 years at certain villages around New York State that have gone away, it's not because the bigger entity that they were in, the town or the city, made them go away. It was that village's actions or lack thereof that made it such that they all of a sudden were insolvent, and the bigger entity had to come in and take it over. And I I want to make sure everybody understands something on that. If and when that ever happens, it's not going to be the 40,000 town people that will spread that problem over. It will be a village district. And that would sadden me, because I think there's an opportunity today, in 2021, to have the vision to sit down and get this done between these two government agencies. And that's the one thing that you said, that when this group was getting together, the one unique aspect to this, when you brought in the guy from Wayne County, when you had people call other consolidations around the state in the last 10 years, the one missing commonality is that in all of those consolidations, you had 2 or 3 or 4 municipalities leadership that had the vision to know, we need to do something, we need to get together, sit at the table to get this done. And I guess I've been here 18 months now, and I just can't get it. We're not at that point yet. Look at this meeting tonight. Everything about body English and facial expressions show that you don't want any part of this. And I just don't understand that, because I'm very concerned that if you don't open your eyes to some of these things, that the future in indebting a village, a $3 million annual budget for $8 million today, and then in 7 years another $8 million, yeah, I really think that is going to be problematic, because if you have an event that costs $500,000 or $1 million, you don't have the reserves to go and get it. So you're going to go borrow it. I was in the mortgage business for 25 years. People would come and borrow money from me. Then they'd come again in 2 years to borrow and refinance. And then we'd get to a point where they come to borrow and we'd say, we can't lend you anymore. That's my concern, is that if you operate in this on your own without us teaming up to do what's good for the whole community, fair and equitable to the town residents and the village residents, and then, as I've said, parlaying that so we as a team move on to that Xerox campus and start doing the things I've said to you, Daryl, splitting the lines out of the middle of buildings, working on the roads so we can start moving that campus. That's gonna need teamwork out of the village government and the town government. That's just a fact. And I can assure you this, if we move the needle on that, everybody in this community, town and village, will benefit. Because instead of 4 million square feet of empty space, you'll get new industry over there, 21st century industry, that when they look at what we built over on Phillips Road as a community sewer plant with a campus also over a wall in 250, it has the technology to take some of this new age industry that has discharge that isn't Xerox water. It's maybe thicker and whatever, but that's going to tax this type of technology where you're just replacing 1970 stuff with 2020. And that's why the town is trying to get ahead of that with visionary technology at this plant. And I really hope that that's for the whole community, not just for the town plant. Because if it is just for the town plant, because the town will move on. We will move on to a town plant. It's very obvious that that is the best thing to do. I would be very saddened if it's not with the village.
Are you saying, if the town, if the village board doesn't support and go with the consolidated sewer, that you won't support the Xerox Railroad's effort or any of the efforts over?
See, Jake, don't put words in my mouth. All right, don't put words in my mouth. The reality is this, and you're not a spring chicken, okay? You can't sit there at our age. We're pretty similar age, all right? So I'm not a spring chicken either. No. You can't sit here and have this type of non-team orientation, all right? And then all of a sudden snap our fingers and we walk over to Xerox and everything's going to be great, we're going to be a team.
I think there are different efforts, and if one makes sense and one doesn't, we look for the greater community and do what's right for the community. That's my point. And
so let me ask you something, Jay.
If I can, real quick, some of the efforts you were talking about, the strength, you obviously educated yourself on the strength of waste, and you understand that. So or town waste is right here and say it's 15, whatever units you want to call them, it's 15 and the village is 10. Town waste is stronger. And the town has 3 times the flow as the village. So there's 45. For every 1,000,000 gallons here, there's 45 units here and there's 10 units here. You put them together, it's 55 units. That's 13 3/4 average. So the village would go from 10 to 13 3/4. The town would go from 15 down to 13 3/4. It's going to cost the village more.
Jake, and I'm going to say this again, and Marshall, you remember when I was sitting in that meeting and I said, I'm trying to figure out how do we get the most advantageous index of fair and equitable. What you just described, Jake, is you're like, see what you guys are going to do? So you put your heavy stuff in so you can jam it down the village. I'm trying to do the exact opposite.
Back and forth.
And be honest with you,
We need to move on.
I'm not going to sit there and try to jam accounting down your throat. I don't have Rick Canale and our sewer people here today to talk about that stuff.
Oh, this was an accounting thing.
But no, that is a flow, and that's a weight and all that stuff. So, you know,
We have
I just hope.
question. We need to move on.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. As far as, you don't have a question for me, right?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know about that. Go get him, Peter.
Peter Elder, 15 Dunning Avenue. Supervisor, I respect you a lot. I really do. And I've worked with you and I continue to respect you and what you do. But I have to tell you that I would not characterize this village board the way you did. I believe their body language tonight is exactly the opposite you said. I see them as being open. I see them as listening. I see them as engaged. And I've known them for a long time, each and every one of them. I can go down and tell you how long I've known them. I've known a lot of the town board members also for even longer time. So I guess my read of their body language is different. I see them as being like, you know, very, they listen to the issues, they've decided the issues. I know they're talented people, they're experienced, and they lead this village. So I just want to say that I didn't like that part of your presentation because I like your skills, I like all of your skills, I like all of their skills. And I think you should all be complimented for being here tonight listening to this combined presentation. I also want to assure you that having been here to many village board meetings over the last 20-some years, this board has a very, very good idea of how to separate their general fund and their sewer fund. We went through this 4 years ago. Our former mayor, Mayor Cahill, actually went to great lengths, and I actually have minutes and notes on this to explain how it was done. He did excellent research on how to divide these two funds. I very much believe this board has a very good idea about how to do that, just so you know. And I still think the issue with tonight comes down to we're no closer to understanding costs. We have a lot of good presentations, and this presentation is similar to and reflects one that we had not long ago in terms of its vision, but the thing we don't have is cost. And to my mind, just as I would approach a town resident about cost, I would ask you about cost, I would ask the mayor about cost. I think cost is a huge issue for our village residents. What is the bottom line of this cost to our residents? So you also approach the idea of risk, and I just wanted to address that as well. I realize that there is a discussion about, and you're absolutely right, you know, you look at Xerox over the last several years, it has been a declining issue. But I don't know that that's necessarily fate. It also could be an inclining issue at some point where the village is able to take advantage of that because we have 2/3 of the Xerox's campus. And I very much hope the town can take that whole prosperity as well. So I realize it's one thing to say that it's going to keep going down or it could go down, but it also could be a recovery. You could see a blossoming of that campus, and not just because of the village board, but because of all the work the two boards got through together. And I guess the final thing I would kind of say is this. The town and the village get along really well. I guess I wouldn't really characterize it as tribal. Again, I've been involved in government since 1989, ran for my first office in 1993, and you can do the calculation, I was pretty young. And so, all that time, you know, what I have actually seen is the opposite. I've seen trucks shared, services shared. I have seen intermunicipal agreements done. I've seen exactly the opposite of tribalism. I've seen cooperation. Now, of course, there's controversies between governments. I suppose maybe Penfield and Webster has their moments as well, perhaps. I don't know. Or Rondequoit and Webster, too. I remember some issues there. Those issues arise. That's the natural way we do it. We all kind of try to protect our self-interests. And having been mayor for three years, and I can kind of tell you that's a natural thing you kind of get into. But that doesn't mean we gave up our cooperation with the town, ever. The town is a valuable partner to the village. So I assume that it will always be a valuable partner to the village. I think that's a different issue entirely. Because what we're here tonight is not about that long-standing, prosperous partnership. What we're here about is, I'll do it one more time, the cost. Right? Let's get that number. After all these years and all these studies, and I've got them all, I've read them all, you complimented the other day about it too, you know, we've got to know the cost. Can't we just know that number? Can't we? We got talented people. Look at them all. Look at them all. They're all talented. I know all of you. You're all talented. I'm not nearly as talented, right? I just read the studies. I just know the numbers in my head. But you guys, you live it. So let's just get a cost before we make a decision about what to do. Let's let the village residents know, let's let the town residents know for that matter, what the costs are going to be, and then make the decision. You talked about risk. Let's have no one make risk. Let's have there be as much zero risk as possible, so that what can happen is we all know the costs moving forward. You're a talented guy. You are. You're an exceptionally talented guy. And I want to compliment you over and over. I'll keep doing that. But so are they. So you're all kind of working on this together. And I think the one thing we need to do is move forward knowing what the liability of our village residents are. That's all. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for the presentation, Matt, and we've had very good dialogue back and forth. So at this point, I think I need to close this, and we need to move on to other business. Thank you, board, for coming. Appreciate it, and we will need to move on at this particular point.
I hope so. I hope so. Listen, you're talking very good. I'm not talking about these guys don't know. Getting into this discussion. I'll be very quick.
How you doing, Rick?
Good. Okay, we are going to move on at this particular time. We can come back and move on. We have two more presentations. The first is Ahmed going to speak regarding the, I believe, the opening of the new facility, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mayor Byers. And Village Board members, Jerry, thank you for allowing me a few minutes tonight. My name is Ahmed Mustafa. I'm one of the paramedics here in Webster and one of the volunteer firemen. I've been in this community for 21 years. And tonight I'm here with a very special request. But first of all, Jerry, the next time I ask for time on the agenda, you should tell me, don't tell Karen, come with me, it'll be 5 minutes and we'll go to dinner, because apparently my kids are having dessert. So, as you know, and Mayor Byers mentioned, NEQALS is in the process of finishing our building on 1030 Jackson Road. It has been a work of passion for the last 4 years, and the conclusion is near. We were hoping to open the building in June, but for a variety of delays, it is pushed into late July, early August. And so last night at our board meeting, the board said, you know, don't give yourself another deadline that you have a chance of missing. Buy yourself a little time, so push it into September. So as we were sitting and talking about it, we said, wow, there's some big events happening in September. And it's relevant to me and this village board and this town because I'm a 9/11 responder. And in 2002, the village and the state of New York handed something that hasn't left my wall since March of 2002, which was a medal and a proclamation given to me by the village and some members of the town board and some others for my time at Ground Zero. And so, as we were thinking in our board meeting last night, we said, wouldn't it be interesting to dedicate the brand new EMS building that serves the community of Webster on September 11th? And I thought, I got goosebumps as I'm getting right now. And so I said, well, traditionally the village has an event on 9/11 that they've given me the honor of speaking at several times. And I thought, before we say that would be a go, no-go, I would like to humbly ask the mayor and the village board members, as well as my town board members, if with your permission we could make the opening of the new EMS base in the town of Webster on September 11th be a part of the village ceremony and we host it at our building. I can see it would be a neat story to tell that say, in remembrance of all those that gave their lives, all the first responders that gave their lives, and in recognition of all the first responders that do things in the community, we'd have the fire department come down Jackson Road, the 2 trucks with the flag. It could be an amazing historic event to celebrate the 20th anniversary of this, historic day in our nation. And so that's what I'm here to ask, is if we could reschedule our opening from the 26th of June to the 11th of September at 5:30 in the evening, and if we could co-host the event with the town and the village at our new base on Jackson Road.
Love it. I love the idea.
I would be more than honored to be able to be part of that ceremony. And I think for the board as well, we accept and we will be present.
Awesome. And so, I don't know who to talk to logistics about, but usually you have a program and speakers. Maybe we could coordinate how that gets done. Some people from the town, and Senator Helming has said she would like to attend, and some others. So tell me, I can talk to Jared later about who, but thank you very much. I'm sorry to interject in this important evening, but we have to get invitations out tomorrow.
Thank you. Order some food and Daryl will pay for it.
Okay. So thank you very much, and we'll be in touch. All right. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Should have let you go first.
That's what my intent. That's what my intent.
That was the plan.
Always go before Tom.
So, all right, thank you. Thank you for staying.
Good job. That's right.
That was an epiphany last night.
I think it was
For you especially. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll talk more about coordinating the whole thing.
Okay, perfect. Okay? Thank you very much.
And now, we have one more presentation. Matt, I believe that you would like to present a little bit of information regarding consolidating the funding application, regarding a number of our park programs, and also, I believe, possible streets as well. I'm not sure.
Pull it up.
Great, thank you very much. Again, the packet in front of you says it has 23 slides. I'm going to go through them extremely fast because everybody's got presentation fatigue, potentially myself included. So 2021 consolidated funding application cycle. So every year, state government puts out a consolidated application program for 7, 10, 15 different funding agencies, all open up their grant windows in a certain period of time. This year it's May through July 29th, and there are multiple programs available this year, 2 of which could be the village could be eligible to apply for. And there's one would be the New York State Parks Program. Back in 2018, the village hired a landscape architect and came up with some conceptual redevelopment plans for both Veterans Park and Chance Park. Those are capital improvement projects that would require a relatively sizable amount of matching funds. 50% of the project cost would have to be borne locally. You would request 50% of those funds from the state. And those are very competitive funding sources, both the Veterans Park and Chance Park. And then there's a different program that has been available in past years, but has not been available for probably the most recent 5-year period. And they've just started funding it again. Personally, I think this is likely your better long-term scenario to help solve some future visioning and planning purposes for a larger component of the municipality. But let's first talk about the other 2 programs, the New York State Parks Program. So Veterans Park, some great renderings were done, and a development and revitalization plan for the gazebo area to really make this a jewel of the village's park system. But the cost associated with that was roughly $450,000 for phase 1 and another sizable chunk of change for phase 2, which would be totaling probably another $280,000. So it was like a $700,000 project. So the capital outlay would be roughly 50% of that. So we would have to devise a way to pay for that with either general fund monies and some matching funds from staff and in-kind services, as well as the Parks Trust Fund. In addition, at the same time in 2018, Chance Park also had a concept to revitalize the southern portion of the park where the current tennis courts are. Roughly another $400,000 investment that would repurpose the tennis courts, put in a parking lot, put in a pavilion. Definitely significantly increase the user friendliness of that park on the southern end. And it very well might make even more sense today with the 128 units going in across the street. It may be a viable alternative, but that's also, again, we're talking about 50% matching funds for that project. So you have really some 2 options on a capital improvement program, and these 2 park projects, I think, would be good, viable. You're going to pick one or the other. We're not going to apply for both. But to the tune of probably approaching $250,000 of local funding required, which is not insignificant in these times with all these other budget constraints. The last program that I want to tell you about it's a misnomer. It uses the word brownfield, but it's really not. We're not going to. The state put a terrible name on this program. Opportunity Areas Program, brownfield Opportunity Areas Program. This is a revitalization planning program, and the suggestion that I have is in 2020 we attempted to obtain federal transportation planning funds for the area of the North Village. And how do we plan for the future of this area? Almost like how do we create a mini comprehensive plan? Look at land use, look at roadways, look at trail systems. What this program would also allow you to do is look at all of those things, but also develop conceptual plans for how vacant areas of the community could be redeveloped. So these are the areas within the Xerox campus, and I'm going to actually go all the way to the end, because some of the things that we can fund with this program include, it's a comprehensive analysis. can do economic and market trend studies. We can really start looking at design estimates. And one of the things that I think even Jake mentioned that really perked up his ears was, well, we can actually pay for the engineering, the re-engineering of Donovan Street or Commercial Street. If we can actually, this could be a source of funding in the future phases, like phase 2. You can actually ask for engineering funds, not for the construction, but for the engineering, and then be ready so that all of that upfront work has been completed, so that when monies do become available on the transportation end, you'd easily be able to know what your project cost is, and then you'd be able to apply for it. So that the goal of this program is to prepare you for revitalization on a larger scale. And some of the things that are that could be viable would be highest and best use studies. What are we going to do with that area of north of Orchard Street and at Xerox, that open field, or those 3 vacant buildings totaling 480,000 square feet of vacant office space? What do we do with them? This is a funding mechanism that would allow you to hire consultants at 90 cents on the dollar, and they would be able to come up with scenarios on how to reuse those buildings, and then that could be used to help market the reuse of those buildings or the redevelopment of those vacant buildings. The development pro formas, you could actually get into really highfalutin real estate analysis on it. Okay, if we're going to redevelop that 400,000 square foot building, how's it going to break down? So you could actually then show an actual developer, here's what it's going to take. Infrastructure capacity analysis, you could really study the actual, what's going on in the pipes. Geotechnical investigations. These are all things that can be done, and of course, updates to the zoning code. So at the end of this, you could use this as a funding source to update your comprehensive plan for these areas of the town, and including the zoning code itself. So the area of, and I'm flying through it, but there's a lot of data that you can read, but basically the suggested boundary, which is suggested, would be bounded on the south by 104. It would actually go across Phillips Road to include this complex of almost, I would say, 90% vacant buildings. So Houston Street, I think, is this street right here would be the boundary. So it would include this portion of the Xerox complex to really provide a revisioning. What can happen here, and how can the village be an active participant in planning for the future of this area, rather than feeling like it's being held hostage by the landowner? We can be proactive. We can take some level of control of the future of this area by planning for it and then promoting it. And that's what this program would allow us to do. And then it would only make sense to then include the commercial and industrial areas along Donovan, commercial, to help sort of round out how we end up growing this new employment sector, this nexus of employment and taxes within the village. So the next steps for this particular program requires a public hearing. It requires a 30-day public comment period on the draft application. Those are things that we've sort of outlined a schedule, and then submission for it. Any of these applications, should you decide to move on the capital approach or you want to go on the planning approach, all of those submissions would still take place July 29th. So time is ticking. We don't have a lot of time to, there still is some time. Typically these things take about 40 to 50 hours to put together. But that being said, this would require a level of commitment sooner, because there's that public participation component and all the public notice elements that you would need to commit by.
How long have we known about? How long have we known about this? That we're down to the wire here.
Well, we're not really down to the wire. The funding announcement did come out in early May, and Jake and I have met.
I know.
Yep, Jake and I met, and then we roped in the mayor, and we had this dialogue probably 2 weeks ago in preparation for this.
Oh.
And we did send an email, I think, probably 2 weeks ago, highlighting these two options, or these options. It just so happens that we unfortunately dovetailed two public presentations on the same night.
really like it. I like the idea.
So, is there a sentiment, at least even initially, capital project versus planning project?
So, Matt, just so I'm clear, the capital project, does that require a public hearing?
No, it does not.
All right, so it's only the BOA ones
Yes, sir.
that they have to take some action tonight to schedule a
They-
public hearing.
They could, I mean, the public, they could, I mean, technically, depending on the public hearing, I think we felt it could be done on July 15th. Or maybe it would be the 8th. Jake, how do you recall that? It's either
The 15th, because it's a...
the 15th.
It's a...
Right.
It's important, yeah.
And then on July 22nd is the next, that doesn't make any sense because it's the next week. At any rate, I think is that the first board meeting in July? Because of the holiday, right?
Yeah.
Is it the 8th?
We have the 13th. It's going to be a Tuesday, that'll be our organizational meeting. So we can absolutely put that through.
It likely doesn't, Don, it likely doesn't need to happen today, but you would prefer to get notice in the publication next week. You would prefer to have it publicized next week to stay on track. If you wanted to go with the planning program.
Well, that would be the next step, right? Logical one, go with planning.
Well, I mean, obviously, if we go back to it's going to be the least costly in the interim to the village with a much greater long-term upside. Absolutely. I mean, the park projects would be wonderful, and I'm a landscape architect, and I would love for us to do one of these park projects. There's no question about it. From a fiscal responsibility, I'm pushing you to really strongly consider the third option.
I think that that's a good one anyways. And
I agree.
Maybe it allows us, excuse me, to leverage Xerox a little bit in terms of, hey, we're looking at this area of your complex and we think it has potential and this is what we're doing.
I would agree.
So you need something from us tonight or a deadline?
Well, I think that we would just, Jake, I'm not sure if you're able to opine in here. We need basically a resolution to set a public hearing date. That's what we would need tonight, correct?
Yeah, and approval, I think approval for a legal ad.
An approval for a legal ad.
The same thing. And I believe, I'm just reading back through the email I sent a couple weeks ago, that the board, for this evening's meeting, the board consider a resolution to set a public hearing for the 7/8 meeting on the draft.
So this is wrong. I was wrong. It is 7/8. So yep.
On the draft BOA nomination application, I started drafting that brownfield board all in that email. Then the legal ad for the public hearing approval is needed. And then the board set a 30-day comment period on the draft BOA nomination application from June 22nd to July 22nd. The copy will be on, the draft will be with the clerk, and then it will be with the clerk after the 8th meeting. And then the legal ad for the 30-day comment period approval needed. Same legal ad, we can put it in the same legal ad as a public hearing. It must be in the June 16th paper. So that's why imperative that we do it this evening.
We actually don't have a July 8th meeting, that's why it's moved to the 13th. Sorry. It's on the bottom of the agenda.
I saw it there, I thought it was just a mistake.
No.
And that still would be perfectly fine.
Okay.
That was so many good.
Yep.
Why is there no July meeting?
On the 8th.
We have many people aren't going to be here for that day after the holiday, and then the Thursday after that is, I think some event going on, I'm not sure, but Jerry and I had discussed that there was going to be 3 meetings in that month, so that's why Carol, Jerry, and I discussed that it would be the 13th. So we usually do an organizational meeting on a Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month, but it falls near the
So
July
they're
4th.
done. So long as we can have the 30-day comment period end on July 22nd at a regularly scheduled village board meeting such that they can close the comment period and then provide a resolution to submit the application 9 days later, we're fine. Does that make sense?
I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yes.
So the 13th is perfectly fine. That does not throw a monkey wrench in anything. No, there's no apology needed.
You hear that, Don? 13th is fine.
That's okay, I'm still trying to figure out that we always say organizational meetings on Tuesdays. It's like, I guess I missed them. I always show up to them on a Thursday.
Yeah.
Two extra days more.
No idea.
Are there any additional questions regarding this opportunity?
No, this sounds great.
No, Matt, go home to your family, you've done here for 5 hours.
Thank you for passing that on. So do we need to pass something tonight? We do, what is
I think the board should consider a resolution to set a public hearing for 7/13 on the draft VOA nomination application.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Trustee Polito?
Aye.
Trustee Lindsay?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
I do like
And then resolution, the board pass a resolution to set a 30-day comment period on the draft BOA nomination application from June 22nd to July 22nd.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
I'll resend you this too, that you have all those things.
Please repeat that one.
He's gonna send it to you, so you just need.
I know, but I need to.
Al,
hold
Al,
it in second.
Al, and Judy.
Wait for the clerk. Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Polito?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Right?
Can I do one more?
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah.
The board then has to approve, or I guess the legal ad, I don't know if we don't have the legal ad, or the legal ad for the public hearing on the 13th, and the 30-day comment period, I guess would be one legal ad and include both of those things. Because it must be in the June 16th paper, so the legal ad has to say that there's going to be a public hearing on the 13th,
Yeah.
and then the 30-day comment period will be as described, there, June 22nd and July 22nd,
Yeah.
and a copy of the draft will be with the clerk.
That basically has to be done tomorrow, correct? Maybe get into the paper next week.
Yeah.
It has to be the
Or
16th
Monday.
paper, yeah.
Very earliest.
Can you pull it off, Heather?
Yes, sir.
So I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Trustee Polito?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Right, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you, ma'am.
Thanks, man. Great job.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in, Carl.
All approved. Aye.
All right. Why don't we move to our scheduled agenda, regularly scheduled agendas for If I could open it for public comment. Is there anybody who would like to address the board?
Very, very quick. So there's been some rumors out there and some allusion to it tonight that there might be a decision of some sort made in 2 weeks. And I'm just curious, what's that, what does it look like? Is it a motion of some sort? Is it a, and I'm not even asking you to answer, it's more rhetorical, but I'm just wondering where is the, like what's the form of the decision or the motion or the resolution the village board would be taking? Because I've been looking at all the information that I've been getting, and the ones that all the stuff you've been providing online, which is excellent, by the way, and I just can't quite figure out what the nucleus of that resolution is. So again, this is mostly a rhetorical question, because you may not have an answer, but it just occurred to me, I don't know what decision, how you reach that decision with a motion or a resolution. So that was it. Okay, thanks.
I believe that there were two avenues of study that were presented that we agreed upon, and there was a definitive timeline for deciding on one or the other approach.
Okay.
So I believe that that's what it will be next week.
Okay.
Or 2 weeks. Yes.
Richard Waller, 20 Elm Street. I just had, in regards to the question that will come up in 2 weeks, during the presentation, Mr. Elder made a very good point, is we haven't heard anything about costs. As a resident paying taxes, my question goes back to cost. If we go with this new type of proposal, I haven't heard anything about what it's going to cost residents. I think this is a big concern to most of the people that attended tonight, is cost. The plan seemed very good, very fair, very equitable, but we don't know that until we know actual costs. And I could stand here and talk for 25 minutes like our town supervisor did, but I'll be nice and go sit down. Thank you.
Nobody knows what the cost is.
How can we make a decision without knowing? Would you buy a car?
It's like Jake's saying, you buy a car and then you figure out what's going on.
That's not entirely true. In August of 2020, there was the joint study by the two engineering groups, and that had laid out all the costs. So read the August 2020 study. That's the latest information on costs. Now those numbers may not be accurate anymore, but that's, I don't know whose fault that is. Nobody's asked anybody to update it. So, but those are the numbers.
About 30. But those costs were based on the assumption of headworks being as part of a regional system and a village-only collection system. But now that with this new with the new group, there's a different approach. And as Peter said, or Mr. Walter said about, perhaps a more equitable approach to the consideration, but we still don't know how it's laid out. And that's been a consistent question, I think, from the residents, and I know myself, since 2017 when they first came in, October 22nd, I think it was, what's the cost? How does this impact our residents? And those costs, the answer to that question was, well, it depends on what the IMA say. And we're almost 3.5 years later, and we don't know what the IMA say. Because it all depends on, make the decision that you're going to do it, and then we'll work out the details.
All right.
It seems to.
Let's move on to the next person.
I'm Lori Reynolds, 138 Johnson Street. I'd just like to talk for the residents. As a member of Webster Citizen Action League, I went and talked to a lot of people in the village who know nothing about what's going on here. They didn't know anything about a meeting tonight. I'm just wondering about the transparency from the village government. I know our supervisor talks about that all the time, and I don't see it in the town either. Shouldn't have something have gone out to the village people about this? And to let them know that this is a very important topic for us to be talking about?
believe that it was in the agenda that was printed in the mail.
Is that enough though? People don't, not all people understand what's going on. This is a major step for our village. You all know that. You all know that. Another thing, our village treatment plant is in good condition. It's been upgraded, it's been maintained for years. My understanding is they got phase 1, 2, 3 or whatever going on in the town now because it hasn't been maintained all these years. What is the chance of us consolidating together and we're going to leave them to be accountable for taking care of the plant? Do you think that's a good idea? What about you, Jerry? Do you think that's a good idea? Would you want them to be accountable for upgrades and maintenance of their past history?
I can't really say they did a bad job. I don't think that's fair for me to say they did a bad job of maintaining their plant. I don't have enough knowledge to say they did a bad job of managing the plant. So to answer that question, I think there's a lot of good things in a consolidation. Then there's things that make you think it'd be better the other way. And Jake's assessment of the car thing, I mean, that's true, but there's a million unknowns. When you're going to decide to consolidate stuff, the things that Matt brought to the table, you don't know those till you start diving into them. So we're never going to have a close to accurate price. Or a price, you're not going to know that. Like Don said, those last numbers were based on that treatment only. We've added some other things to this now. Matt's committee recommended some other things. We were told by the previous town supervisor we would owe $1 million. He didn't want to touch collections. He was questionable on the employees. All that's different information that we're receiving now. There is different grants. There's all sorts of things. I was doing some history on some grants that we could, before our consolidation, we'd be able to get grants to do an assessment of all our pumps and all of the stuff, and maybe even get that done before this consolidation. And now we're not bonding or getting 8 million or 7 million. We may only need 4 million. It could reduce a lot of things. I like the idea that there's potential growth. I like the idea that it's a partnership, not just for this, but for other things. So again, the problem is I think we need to be better in this community about talking and having hard conversations. It doesn't need to be harsh. The way people talk to each other at the podium is not always appropriate. But I think that's what it is. I think Jake's not wrong. We don't know everything, and we can't until you have 2 to 3 years to figure it all out. And unfortunately, when you do something this large, those are the things you chance. There's mergers all over the world that happen, or consolidations. They don't have all the details up front. There's no way of knowing that. So that's where I stand. I've not been one way the whole time. I look at information, I try to take it in and understand it. I try to look now and into the future, and that's how I made my decision. I'm going to try to make the best decision based on how I interpret the information and how I feel it'll affect it.
Okay, you know that the village has a lot of senior citizens there, a lot of people on fixed income, a lot of retirees, and they can't afford what's going on.
Right, but just to respond to if you're saying we don't know what the cost is, you can't make that statement that it's going to be more one way or the other, because you just said you don't know what the cost is.
Well, it's not going to be any cheaper, I'll tell you that. And we just got our tax bill. We're up at least probably $50 from last year.
Yeah, the sewer fee that we just adjusted here from the up to 195 is, I think, almost a 40% increase.
And then you're asking people, once it's consolidated, to take another figure there. Who knows what it's going to be?
Right, we don't know. So I think we got to be consistent with what we're saying. You're saying that it's going to be more money, then you're saying you don't know what it's going to be. It's kind of contradictory.
Even if we do not
It's not going to go down. It's not going to go down. Do any of our taxes go down?
You're right, it's not going to go down, because even if we do not consolidate, if you're upgrading our plant, what do you think is going to happen? How are we going to pay for that? it will go up. And where we are right now is the first, if you want to call it that, of subsequent increases over the next, I'm not sure how many years. But what we're trying to do is we're right now building into, our thought was, as we considered the increase, was to build in monies so that, one, we're not flying by the seat of our pants. And $150,000 or $150, if something broke, we would have no money. So our plan was to have monies available, and then as we went through our own plant renovations, if you want to call it that, we would slowly be eating away at that, and then there's a point we would have to raise that again. So you can't say just because you have one option of going with the town and you're going to have the costs go up, that we're not going to go up either. So there was no way to stay at $150, no way at all. So if you want to know what we're doing, part of what we have done is we have put into the budget monies that are now sitting there that, well, we're also using them now to pay off the $257,000 that our digester cost the village several years ago. Okay? When that's paid off in our next budget, not this one, but our next one, that money's difference between what it's going to cost actually for treatment and the collection and what we're charging is going to go into a fund which can be used then if we have an emergency, which we have no money right now if we have an emergency.
How can you say that you don't have any money? And then Matt Chatfield showed us other upgrades you're going to do in the village. I don't understand that.
Other upgrades?
Well, the parks and all sorts of things that you just showed that we could get grants for. How could you say that we don't have any money?
Well,
and
one thing we just didn't do is we didn't say, yeah, we like the $220-some thousand. Okay? You have a question?
He's not giving me information. Don't even listen to him. You know, it's like a waste of time.
So it's not a debate. I'm going to end that and I'll take into consideration what you have to say.
Okay, I just want you to consider the residents and consider how we feel about it. A lot of people want to keep our sewer. We want to keep our village too. I don't care what Mr. Flaherty said. I see this as a way to get rid of the village down the road. Just like water was the first start, and our village will be gone. So think about that, please. Really consider how you're voting.
Okay, I will close the public comment portion of the meeting. We will move now to our first item on the agenda, which is a resolution to approve minutes from the May 27th meeting. If you have a chance to look them over, I do believe by now, and I have a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy? Trustee Belkane? Trustee Ippolito? Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Secondly, we have a resolution to approve the claims and warrants. There's a question that I have, and that would be boots under the Ultra Rental and Supply. I'm on the first page. Clancy boots, $140. Is that paid out of our funds, or is that part of the allowance that they have?
Paid out of the bill paid, and then it comes out of it subtracted from the exposure allowance. Right?
question on the Edna-struck replant mulch. It's on, I believe, the third page up at the top. $1,250. If that's the amount of money that was invested in that small little park there on Lapham, and I think that it behooves the village to keep it up. And that means to take out the weeds, not just weed whack them, but dig into the dirt, get the weeds out, and there's stuff growing up, not grass, but all over that place, that island, that it looks pathetic.
Yeah,
If we've invested that kind of money in that park as a memorial, I think it needs to be dealt with and kept up. So I'm just making that as a comment.
Yeah, I already talked to Jake and Jim Plains.
Well, that's fine.
So
Making a public
that's what
comment
they've
about
been
it.
doing.
What they've been doing it certainly doesn't look like they're too far out there.
No, yeah, we were just discussing that today.
Everybody, please turn your mics on, please.
Just cut these buttons.
Yeah, Jake. We just got
Oh, yeah, we were just talking about that today. There's an inordinate amount of weeds that grew up. So I don't know if it's something that was in the topsoil or.
that's what I think it was in the topsoil.
But yes, it's on the list.
Good. Anything else on the budget?
Quick one here, the low statement. 368 for vacuum cleaner and 314 for various tools. Seemed a little excessive, but I figure I asked.
Jake, you want to address that?
Yeah, which one's excessive, the tools or?
What kind of tools were there? Accessories for the vacuum cleaner?
No, there was tools, hand tools, and we don't have the bill pay thing with us, do we? No, okay. We can certainly get the answers to that. I looked at those just the other day. I'm trying to recall exactly. I know there's some hand tools that we got. And the vacuum cleaner, I was a little surprised. It was a Sharp Navigator full something. I forgot what it.
Oh, it's heavy duty or?
Yeah, I looked online and that was about the going rate for those. So
He's just trying to solicit.
I was kind of surprised.
I remember seeing the receipt for that. Now that I look at it, they bought a lot for that amount.
All right. Oh, yeah, for the tools? Yeah, I remember there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, just checking.
Jake, can you please talk in your mic? Thank you. If you can't.
He needs his own mic.
I know, it's in the budget.
Yes, I will soon, once that budget item gets solved.
So I'll ask for a motion to approve the warrants and claims.
I'll make that.
I'll second.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
That's not you, as soon as I turn mine
Trustee Ippolito?
on. Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next, we have a motion to authorize the mayor to sign an agreement with the Board of Cooperative Educational Services of Nassau County for the purpose of participating in a collective cooperative bid at a cost of $450, which will be used towards the purchase of a truck. Looks like the exact same thing that we looked at, and I wondered, was there a need to have things changed? And I also wanted to know if that $450 entitled us to be on any of this list.
No.
Did you check into that?
Yes, we did, or I say we, because I'm taking credit for John's work, like always. John looked into it, and the $450 is for the trucks, or the vehicles, that section of it. They each have a different cost. Each of those items that were in there have a different cost associated with them. The computer one, you said was $1,200?
Yep.
If you wanted to be on that bid list, or be able to utilize that bid list. There's a cost associated with.
Didn't you just bring this to us last?
Yeah, it was tabled from last week or last meeting for those questions, and so we were able to find out. Or, like I said,
Also, we were asking if that one-time fee covered everything.
Yeah, it covered more than just the vehicles, and it does not. That's just the vehicles, and then each different category of items has its own costs associated with it. And my suspicion is based on the number or the complexity of the bid, that you have the number of different things within those categories, where the complexity of the bid, there's a lot to manage, so they kind of seek people to share those costs if they're going to use the benefit from their work for the bidding process, that they try to spread that out among all the users.
This is available every year?
It's good. It's good for 1 year. It's good for 1 year.
It's good for 1 year.
Yeah, for the $450. I'm sorry, but for the $450, it's good for one year. It said it said it ends in October, but they say if you join it 4 months within that term, you get it for the remainder of the year, or a year total.
And do you have anything in writing that says the $450 gets applied to the cost of the truck?
I had that from Rock Busto here. I can get it.
So right now it's just verbally that they're going to apply it towards, well, you got to trust them.
I trust them.
And do you know what the village's equitable share of the administrative costs of this bidding program is? In the resolution it says, and again, frankly, I'd be embarrassed to sign and mail this resolution in its current form. It's got school district where it should say village, it's got town where it should say village. Somebody needs to change this thing. But it says, be it further resolved that the town, well, that should be village, agrees to assume its equitable share of the administrative costs of the cooperative bidding program. So what's the village getting involved in? Do you know?
When I spoke with the gentleman who was buying our replacement W6 truck through, when Jake and I went through there, we used the, I don't know, Jake, what's the name of that?
Mini bid.
Mini bid. And that's what, and we had to get all these other, basically all these places came in with different bids. And the gentleman I dealt with recommended going through this BOCES. He said it's what everyone down in Nassau County uses. And he just said it was an easier process, and he recommended doing it. I mean, we can say no and just go with the mini bid.
Well, John, I don't, all it is, it's like a phone call to the guy saying, look, here's the resolution says in the last paragraph. Maybe there aren't any equitable shares, and they don't bill you for it. But
Just ask.
I can't really tell this board to adopt this resolution in its current form without knowing, is there an equitable share of the administrative costs or isn't there?
I think you may have asked that question last time.
Yeah, however, there's somewhere I saw a name and a phone number.
We talked about this.
Yeah, I saw you got a name and a phone number of some guy down there in Long Island.
Yep, I got
it's the very last,
all right.
And then if he has the resolution in Word form, tell him just to send you the Word document, and then Heather, I'm sure, will volunteer to change.
To update it correctly, yes.
To cross out, to get rid of school district and or town and insert village.
County, everything, yeah.
I hope you're not looking to buy this truck tomorrow, I hope.
I need it, but
Monday.
So just to be fair, you weren't able to be at the last meeting, so these were the same kind of
that's
questions.
fine. I'll send an email tomorrow.
Okay.
I apologize for not sharing them. Because they were, I thought I captured all of them. I think I forgot that one about the,
Doesn't Heather send you this agenda ahead of time, John? So we can prep this before the meeting?
Pardon me?
Like these questions you had. Like, I'm just wondering if we can capture before we put John on the spot. We can capture the changes before.
I got the agenda and the packet at the same time that you did, which was sometime today. And I'm sorry, but in my law practice, I didn't have a chance to call John up and ask him these kind of questions.
But they're good questions, we need to
Well,
get
they're
answers.
good. If I had more advance notice, because we went through all this 2 weeks ago, so I kind of thought in 2 weeks, we would have gotten the answers by now, but.
Fair enough.
And I apologize for that, Don. I
No,
tried.
that's all right.
We were really busy. I'm so sorry.
No,
And
you didn't get
I did send an email to Jake and John today, or yesterday, saying, did you get answers for this yet? So, I tried.
No, and I thought I did. I didn't capture Don's question when I was sharing it with John.
I was just under the impression I had to figure out if it covered everything, or how long it covered for.
That was the one question. And then the other one was just this last paragraph, this last resolution about administrative costs. And then just cleaning up the resolution itself to get rid of school districts and towns and stuff.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
so,
All right.
we will table that and get a little bit further clarification.
Bigger notes. Well, John's here.
Oh, yeah.
Item 4 is a resolution to authorize the mayor to sign an agreement with Lavella for professional services to complete the update of the 2017 wastewater treatment plan evaluation study required by the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation and the Department of Environmental Conservation. Got a chance to look that over. So this is a resolution to bring that study from 2017 up to date last 3 years.
Yes.
Don, can I ask you a question? About the last resolution, it was still left on the table, so we don't need to vote to put it back on, do we? Or was it tabled?
It's kind of still tabled.
Yeah, so I don't, okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Fee for the service is $4,500, and and it is an authorization to proceed, giving us the opportunity to either move forward with this or it could be canceled. If we decide next meeting to adopt the second of the two options. But this is authorization, signed the agreement with Lavella to complete the update.
I'll make that motion. I'll make that motion.
I believe that the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation and Department of Environmental Conservation would require this, whether if we were to decide to move forward. Since all was provided is 4 years old.
Yeah, this is the update, the 2017 engineering study, the engineering report that's for the EFC as part of the grant, maintaining eligibility.
Okay. Okay, yes. Yes. Okay. Did you?
I already did.
Okay, second. That's what it's for.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Alito? Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
At this, let's see, we have item 5, I believe. Resolution to authorize the treasurer to sign the appraisal agreement with industrial appraisers for an on-site inspection and appraisal of the building structures, the site improvements, insurable and uninsurable, the fixed equipment, machinery, movable equipment indicated in the agreement. The agreement included barcode tagging of movable equipment. You have all of this in front of you. I believe that the cost is $8,000.
Yes, 8,300, and annual fees of 400.
I don't have a copy in front of me, but I believe the barcode section of it is another 1,000, maybe 1,500, I can't recall.
1,050?
1,050, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That was to provide the tags.
That's the fee to provide tags and tag movable equipment with replacement cost exceeding. Yeah, fee to provide the tag.
I had a question. On the properties to be appraised, the cell tower isn't listed. Is the village insuring the cell tower? Shouldn't that be included? The village owns it.
Yeah.
How old is the cell tower?
3 years old.
3 years, okay. I betcha they,
Well, it wasn't around the last time they did it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then dropped from the list are any of the structures on the Wellfield property. Now, I suppose the village doesn't care if they burn down because they're not being used, but if they're paying to insure them, do you need them as part of the?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Don, you're on your game tonight, I gotta say.
Although you got a question, why are you insuring them? Do you care if they burn down? They're not being used for anything.
Wow,
But
yeah.
that's not.
It can
No,
cause other
this
things.
appraisal has nothing to do with liability. You're not getting, the appraisal is for property damage. It's not, it doesn't matter. You don't need an appraisal to get liability insurance. The equipment would probably be insured separately.
Yeah.
You can, if you look at, you're probably now insuring the buildings. If you want to continue to insure the buildings, they should be included on the list.
Yeah.
I think
But
we should.
that may affect the price. Instead of $8,000, it might be a little more to do the cell tower and the water, the Wellfield buildings, but if they're gonna do it, you should get everything.
Do the whole thing.
Wellfield also?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, Marcia.
no problem.
I don't know why they dropped the Wellfield buildings. I recall they were on the other goal. Mayor Cahill kept talking about using that value as what the land was worth. Well, one thing, these appraisals do not include the value of any land.
Just structure.
It's just the structure.
And then minute details.
Right.
It's amazing sometimes.
Yes.
You say your carpet, the pen that you dropped on the floor, that'll be in here and everything. And then they send me a list and say, hey, go through it. Yeah. Kind of got coffee breath. I'm trying not to breathe on that. Nobody brought mints tonight.
Yeah, nobody forgot to turn this off.
I know.
I can't think of
So you wanna table this till Marcia has them amended?
Yep.
This will be tabled until we have further information. further inclusion, I should say, in this property, including the well field and the cell tower.
Mayor Byers, we'll just need a vote on the table.
All right?
Just need a vote to table.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second. Done.
Trustee Abolito?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
At this particular time, what I would like to do is I'd like to ask for a resolution to move into executive session before we hit item 6 for a discussion regarding the possible employment of a particular person.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Thanks, Judy.
Trustee Abolito?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Marcia.
Let's go.
Into the kitchen.
The kitchen.
Yes, we got to say exactly what we are.
Okay, can I have a motion to come out of executive session?
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane?
Aye.
Trustee Abolito?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 6, resolution to authorize the village clerk to hire an office clerk, and it is at $16 an hour. She has been through her interview process. She is awaiting word tomorrow, and I believe she would be able to, accepting the position, to begin
We said two weeks.
2 weeks. And at this particular point, from what I hear, as I go into the office and things are being booked, especially now that things are opening up, passports are they're a little overwhelming. They could use the additional person. So, may I have a motion authorizing the village clerk to hire an office clerk?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Abolito?
Aye.
Trustee Belkane? Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right.
Good job, Heather.
Thank you.
No, due to the hour, I have nothing to add.
Thank you,
Um,
I yield my time to the superintendent of public works.
Oh, my God.
We will move to the clerk. Heather. Want to leave the hiring and termination policy discussion for the next meeting?
Sure. No problem. Just wanted to give an update, actually a question. I don't know really what to do. This gentleman came in today, and he is going to be going to Berlin, which I tried to call you about this, Jake, but I think you're busy. He's going to be going to Berlin and meeting with multiple dignitaries, and this is something that it's not just some guy off the street, this is what he does. And he requested 5 or 6 of our centennial coins. I was hoping you knew what I was trying to say.
I'm just wondering if it's that one guy that sometimes comes in and says,
Oh, I want one too.
or
Do we have one?
Well, he's going to Berlin in October and has requested 5 of them. And actually, I was gonna ask Peter too, because we're not sure. We know they were given out, but we don't know what the cost was of them, or it was a really random request, but yeah.
Do you have one?
Yes, we have 20 of them, 20, I think 25, and he's requesting 5.
I think you have one.
Well, if you go to Berlin, meet with somebody.
I think we had them down to like $2.50 a piece,
Okay.
something like that. We didn't give them away,
Like
but
$2.50? Okay.
yeah, $2.50.
Okay, just
Oh, that's 250.
No, they started off at like 10, believe it or not.
Well, I told Daryl they were gold today, so.
About 2,000.
Same too for me.
So, are you okay with me giving 5 away?
You gotta sell them to them.
Okay, sell
250
them.
each.
If they're $2.50 each, you probably didn't know that. That's pretty cheap.
Okay.
Sure they are.
They cost a lot more than that to buy.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And then, yeah, I can hold off on the other thing. Thanks, Daryl.
I get a senior discount. 10%.
Okay, it's past 10 o'clock, we need to go home. You can tell.
That was good.
Sewer, things are flowing.
Things are flowing.
DPW.
I'm going to give you all the senior discount on my comments this evening. The sidewalks are done being poured, concrete's all placed, and forms are off, except for along that little section of Corning Park. The contractor in, and again, we use the community development block grant funds that funded the majority of it. It's about $90,000 of that overall project. They replaced about 2,400 feet of sidewalk. But it turned out really nice. They did a really nice job, and they still have to go back and finish the asphalt and then some topsoil and that. But they were there about 4 maybe 5 days, and did all of that. You know, they were, last week it was just Tuesday, Wednesday, and they were already done with the south side and starting on Barrett Drive and coming back. And they got to the barber shop, on Wednesday. So they really got their stuff together and got a nice system down, and they were great to work with. It was a different company this year too, so but it was nice to deal with. And the residents were all very cooperative and helpful. They kept vehicles out of the way and sought alternate places to park. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their cooperation and just ask for another few days while we finish everything up.
Anything else? Anybody have? If not, I would announce that the next village board meeting is June 24th, and that will be followed on July 13th with, we'll have an organizational meeting on that. Village election, that is, I believe, next Tuesday.
Throw a plug for yourself.
Pardon?
Throw a plug for yourself.
What?
Overall age.
Yeah, how about that? There may be, right? Okay, we would like to see everybody here on Tuesday, I believe. Also next Tuesday, I believe that there's an event going on, so the office will be closed after 12 o'clock? 11 o'clock. So if you have village business next Tuesday, please avail yourself of coming in for that prior to 11. There will be an afternoon, there's a, I want to call it a retreat going on in the afternoon. The office staff as well as DPW.
I just, okay, I I just have a question because it's the day we vote. And I know a lot of the elderly come in and vote and pay their tax bill. So I was just, I don't know, I wish we had a different day than that particular day. Because that's voting and all the other. I just.
When does Susan start?
We had to switch it,
2 weeks.
and
We can have Susan call.
I was trying to change it so that Jake could come, because he's supposed to be leaving to see his son. So that's why we changed it to Tuesday. So Jake said it, so you want to take back what you said?
No?
Push it back if it's.
Well, we can't now. We can't.
It's
We already have,
posted.
we
They
already
have it
have the
posted.
date with the restaurant.
Oh.
And I mean, they come up here to vote. They don't go in our office to vote.
No, but it's,
If they come here and make the effort to come here, I didn't think about that, then they can get two birds in essence with one.
We can still put it in our Dropbox, and we can put a note up. I apologize. Trying to accommodate everybody.
So we can make that available, envelopes and
Yeah,
whatever for the Dropbox.
you have envelopes available in case people won't normally come up with an envelope for their tax bill thinking they're paying in person.
Okay.
Leave a stack of envelopes that can, say, by the Dropbox. Say, put it in.
Yeah, or they can put it right through our mail slot too.
And you'll mail them or receive them.
Yes.
You mentioned events, and it just reminded me, and I don't know if someone's gonna say this later, but I did meet with the bid the other day about some of the things, just a preliminary, going over. They said Jazz Fest, which has been, really popular. It's usually in July. They have it this year planned for September 17th and 18th. Also, I'm looking forward to the week of July 27th. It's Christmas in July. They're going to be putting up, and the Elf movie is going to be played on Tuesday in the park there. So they talked to us about even putting up those inflatable Christmas decorations and things like that. So it sounds like a lot of fun. And they plan on having like a beer garden type thing on that Friday on the 30th on West Main Street. They did discuss another event like that in August on West Main Street too. And there's in that week of July, the 27th, when the Elf movie is, and the garden, they talked about maybe even looking at doing another event that week too, trying to fit something else with that same Christmas theme, I guess. But yeah, so it sounds like some fun stuff, getting back to a little normalcy.
Love it.
I believe also there's going to be a concert by, I don't know the name of the group.
His name is Pooch.
What?
Yeah, not yet. There's going to be a band concert on the corner of Park Avenue and South Avenue. And there's going to be an ice cream truck and food truck there. And I believe it's from 2 until 5.
2 until 5 this Saturday. And also they will be playing later in the summer at the gazebo as well. So, preview concert and then actually at the gazebo. All right, anything else? John? Motion to adjourn.
I'll make it.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?